Why are we experiencing such rapidly rising prices for goods and services, and when are we finally going to get some relief? That's what we're going to talk about in this video, so let's get into it right away. But welcome everyone, thank you so much for joining me. If you're new here or if you haven't done so yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button right down below the video. Thank you, I truly appreciate it, and let's talk through this. So now if you ask anybody why prices are rising so rapidly out there right now on goods and services, most people would respond by saying it's because of inflation. Well, yes, but what does inflation actually mean, and when will we finally get some relief from all of this? Well, here's the thing. It all simply comes down to how much money is actually floating around in the system right now. The reason why we're seeing so much inflation and so much rising of prices right now for goods and services is simply because of the massive supply of money that is out in the system right now. Now, you might be wondering, what are you actually talking about? Well, here's the thing. Take this into perspective. Since early 2020, so about a year and a half ago, over the last year and a half, the government has pumped about $6 to $7 trillion into the system as a result of all of this money printing. So, what happens to all that money and where does it go? Here's the thing. When the government spontaneously prints about $6 trillion or $7 trillion over the course of about a year and a half, that is a ton of supply. In fact, over 20% of the money supply that we have floating around in this country right now was printed in the last year and a half. So that is a lot of extra money that is floating around out there. As a result, there's more money floating around. As in, you probably have more money floating around, I have more money floating around, businesses, everybody has more money in their pockets these days. It doesn't matter. Maybe it could be $1 more, maybe it could be $5 more, maybe it could be $10,000 more. It doesn't really matter. My point is, everybody mostly has a little bit more money in their possession. Maybe it's today or over the course of the last year and a half. For the most part, everybody had a little bit more money in their possession. As a result of the stimulus checks, the 3 stimulus checks that were sent out, maybe as the PPP loans, the EIDLs, the child tax credit payments that are going out, all of this money that is being sent out on a regular basis to millions upon millions of people, as a result, more people have more money in their accounts, in their pockets, and this money is to be spent. Therefore, people are going out into the economy, buying goods and services, and bidding up prices simply because there is more demand for the same goods and services. Because people have a little bit more money in their pockets, therefore, we can pay a little bit more. So it's more of like a little bit of a competition going on out there right now, if that kind of makes sense. So think of like an auction. This is like a really good analogy, actually. Think of an auction. Okay, so you're sitting back in an auction. By the way, when I was a kid and I would attend auctions with my dad, he would say, do not raise your hand. Whatever you do, keep your hands to your sides. You know what I mean? Because at the time, my dad was the buyer, and he's like, hey, if you buy something for me on accident, I'm going to be pretty upset, right? So he'd always tell me, keep your hands down. So anyway, just a side note, this is kind of funny. When I was a kid, I remember that very specifically. We'd walk into the room, and he'd be like, keep your hands at your sides. And I was like, fine, whatever, dude. I don't know what you're talking about because I didn't really get it. I was a young kid, you know what I mean? I didn't really know what auctions meant. But I learned very quickly, if you're in an auction and you raise your hand, that means you just bid on something, right? Keep your hands down. All right, so anyway, so think of an auction. You're standing there probably in somewhat of a crowded room or maybe somewhere, and there's a bunch of people around. At the front of the room, you have the auctioneer. He's going through prices. He's rattling off numbers as quickly as he can. And meanwhile, throughout this crowd of people, you have people that are raising their hands spontaneously. In other words, they're saying they're willing to pay that price. Well, depending on whatever the item is for sale, there may be more or less demand for that product. Well, if there's a lot of demand for it, you're going to see a lot of hands rising. In other words, you're going to have a lot of people who want that product who are willing to pay more and more for it, therefore driving up the price. It's simply supply and demand. Supply, in this case with the auction scenario, this example, supply is very limited. Simply, there's one item for sale at the front of the room, right? The auctioneer has one item. Therefore, supply is 1. Therefore, demand, the people out in the field there, out in the room that are bidders, there could be 10 people. Therefore, demand is high. You have 10 people bidding on the same item, therefore driving prices higher and higher. Ultimately, the price will eventually tap out at some point. You never know what that could be. It could be very, very high. You have no clue what that's going to be until the buyers start stepping aside one by one and they say, I love the product, I really want that thing, but I'm just not willing to pay that much. Eventually, one person will prevail and that one person will get the item because they are the one who is willing to pay the most for it. Well, it's the exact same situation that's happening out in the real world right now when it comes to goods and services. When we go out to the stores and we see the same products, the same food products, the same, toilet paper. I mean, seriously, I think everything has increased in price over the last year and a half. And it simply comes down to the same thing. There is far more demand today than there was a year and a half ago for some of these products and services that we were buying, a year and a half ago. Now here it is, a year and a half later, and there's a lot of us competing for the same products and services because we have a little bit more money in our pockets and we're willing to pay more as a result, right? Does it kind of make sense? So it's just like the auction analogy that I just gave you. There's a bunch of buyers and there may be limited supply. Therefore, we continue coming back saying, I'll pay more, I'm willing to pay more, and therefore we throw down our money and we get the product and or services. Therefore, they continue to raise the prices on all of these products and services because they know that people are willing to pay for it, and because of the increased demand, as a function of supply and demand, prices must go up when there is significantly higher demand for a product. We need to raise prices. That's just a simple function of supply and demand, right? So I hope all that makes sense. Now, let's talk about where all this money printing came from. Did they just type in on their printer 10,000 copies and print out a bunch of $100 bills? Well, no, that's not really exactly how it works. They don't physically print paper money. It's simply just changing digits on a computer. Literally, just typing in a few digits and be like, boom, there you go. We just printed $1 trillion. It's literally all that happens. Now, here's the thing. They can't just print money. They can't just change digits on a computer and be like, okay, that's it. We just printed a whole bunch of money. No, what they actually do is they go out and they buy bonds. Now, this is a little bit of a confusing topic, but let me kind of talk you through this in kind of a simplistic way. So basically what the Federal Reserve or the Treasury, what they do is they basically go out and they buy bonds. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking their cash that they essentially just printed and they're exchanging it for bonds. In other words, they're buying bonds and they're holding bonds. Therefore, they're taking the cash that they're using to buy the bonds and they're putting that out into the economy. Therefore, they've exchanged cash for bonds, right? So then they're holding all of these bonds. Well, eventually, someday, they want to decrease the money supply, therefore taking money out of the system. Remember a few minutes ago, I talked about here in the last year and a half now, they've printed over 20% of the dollars that we have in circulation right now have just been printed in the last year and a half. Well, at some point, they will want to decrease the money supply. Who knows when that's going to be? Seriously, it's going to be a long time from now, realistically. But at some point, they will want to reduce the money supply. In other words, take dollars out of the system because there's too many of them floating around out there. So they'll come back and they'll take their bonds and they will sell them back, right? They'll sell them back. Therefore, they'll take their bond and they'll give it back or they'll sell it back, therefore getting cash in return for their bond. Does this make sense? Therefore, as a result of selling all these bonds, they'll be recapturing cash and taking it out of the system. Therefore, all of this cash will no longer be in the system. Again, will they take back all of these trillions of dollars that they printed and put back into the system? No. There's no way that they're going to take back all the money. But they may come back and reduce the money supply by maybe 10%, 5%, who knows, a percentage. But it's highly unlikely that they're going to take back all of the money supply that they pumped back into the system over the last year and a half or so. So it's all a function of buying and selling bonds. Therefore, buying bonds puts cash into the system. Selling bonds takes cash out of the system, or increases the money supply and decreases the money supply. Kind of makes sense a little bit? So the whole point is, during this time right now, when we have all of this extra money that is floating around the economy right now, $6 to $7 trillion of extra money, that money needs to go somewhere. It needs to find a home, right? Well, I think all of us in this community are probably saying, hey, I know where a home is. It's called in my pocket, right? I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure I can find some pretty big pockets and fill them up with cash, right? So I think a lot of us here are probably agreeing that the best place for all that money to go is probably in our possession and not somebody else's, right? But unfortunately, that's not always the case. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, the money needs to go somewhere. It can't just sit around. It needs to keep moving. It's the velocity of money. And that's what's happening right now is we're seeing a lot of velocity of money. A lot of money is changing hands right now. Therefore, it is also contributing to the increased prices that we're seeing out there across the economy. Now, here's the thing. They can print money very, very quickly. It's literally just a matter of, very short term. They can print a lot of money really fast. However, inflation rises also very rapidly. As we've seen over the last year and a half, prices continue to rise very, very rapidly, anywhere between about 0.5% and 1% each and every month over month going forward. That is huge. That is like really high inflation right there. But here's the thing. When it comes time to take all that money out of the system, it's a very slow process. They can't just push a button and all of a sudden they extract $5 trillion out of the system. No, they cannot do that. It's a very slow, drawn-out process. Over long, long periods of time, they'll start drawing back some of that cash that they pumped into the system. So inflation goes up very fast, but yet it comes down very slow. Yeah, right? Yeah, it seems like that's how things always typically work, right? Like that, right? When it's against the people or when it hurts the people, typically it happens very fast. And when it helps the people, typically it's something that happens very slow. Yeah, we typically see this happen all the time. But this is the main reason why we're seeing so much inflation right now and why we're seeing prices rise so incredibly fast at this time. It's because all of the money that's going into the system, the velocity of money that's floating around, and the money supply that is out in the system right now, floating around. The money needs to find a home. In other words, people are just bidding up prices on everything out there right now, just like the auction analogy I gave you just a few minutes ago. So, if you wanted to know anything about inflation and or bond buying, supply and demand, or money supply, or auctions, or I don't know, velocity of money, I guess you just basically learned it right there. It's pretty basic. This is a really basic and rudimentary example right here, but for the most part, this is pretty much all you need to know. It's basically just this on a huge, huge scale with trillions of dollars, if that makes sense. So, hope this kind of lays it out for you a little bit as far as why we are seeing such rapidly rising prices, why we are seeing inflation, and when it comes to inflation, is it going away anytime soon? No, probably not. Just being totally real with you, it's going to be a long time for them to kind of tame this whole thing down right now. It's going to take a very long time, like months and months. Probably, realistically, we're probably going to be in this situation for probably the next year and a half, 2 years. It's probably going to be this kind of situation for a long time from now. It's going to take a very long time for them to kind of taper this whole thing down. Yeah, unfortunately. But a lot of us are feeling the pinch right now when it comes to all of this inflation. So, hope this helps you out a little bit. I hope it helps you understand this whole situation that's going on right now. But either way, I want to help you out in any way that I can. Subscribe right down below the video, share this video or any others here on the channel with your friends, family, social media, and I'll continue to be here for you each and every day.